The air was thick with smoke, the acrid stench of burnt flesh and scorched earth choking the atmosphere. Sergeant Liam Carter picked his way through the battlefield, his boots crunching over the crystallized sand, the remains of the morning's violence scattered in every direction. Bodies, both human and Cyrene, littered the ground, their eyes wide in final, frozen terror. The landscape around him was alien, stark, and unforgiving, as though the very planet itself was trying to erase the violence it had witnessed. Liam gripped his rifle tighter, the weight of the weapon comforting in his hands, even as the gravity of the situation pressed down on him. His squad, once a cohesive unit, was now gone, their biosignatures vanishing one by one during the chaotic retreat. A part of him wanted to curse, to scream out in frustration, but instead he merely muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible over the howling winds. "Mess," he said, his eyes scanning the wasteland. The situation was far worse than he had anticipated. The krill, those vicious insectoid invaders, had struck without warning, wiping out most of the defense forces stationed on Pyros 5. Their attack had been swift and brutal, tearing through both human and Cyrene forces with savage precision. Liam's suit's compromised nav system flickered on the display, guiding him through the desolation. He wasn't sure where his comrades had fallen, but his instincts led him to continue. Alone now, with nothing but his training and sheer stubbornness to keep him going, he moved forward. And then he heard it, a weak, almost imperceptible groan. His body went on high alert, weapon raised as he spun around, scanning the wreckage. He found her behind the twisted remains of a hover tank, her body sprawled in the sand like a discarded doll. A Cyrene warrior. Her pale green skin contrasted starkly against the burnt sand, the deep gashes and plasma burns scarring her body. She lay in a pool of her own blood, both legs severed just below the knee, cauterized stumps from a plasma mine. Her form-fitting black combat suit was torn, charred, and battered, but despite her state, there was something undeniably striking about her. Her stark, white-gray hair matted with blood, but her face still beautiful, even in agony. Liam's heart clenched. There was no question that she was his enemy, one of the Krill's allies. The Cyrene had been at the forefront of the invasion, a race driven by cold ambition and ruthless warfare. And yet, as he stood there looking at her, something tugged at him. The humanity within him whispered a question. Could he leave her to die like so many others had? Her ice-blue eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. They locked onto him. Despite the pain, despite the blood loss, she tried to move, to reach for a weapon that was no longer there. "Easy," Liam said, his voice low and steady. "I'm not here to hurt you." Her response was sharp, filled with spite and desperation, as she spat out something in her own language. The translator in his helmet did its work, rendering the harsh words in perfect, albeit angry, standard. "Kill me or leave, human." Liam blinked, momentarily stunned by the intensity of her words. There was no begging for mercy, no pleading, just a defiant fury that matched the fire he'd seen in many soldiers before. Despite the blood loss, the loss of her legs, she still had her pride, and Liam, of all people, understood that. "I'm not leaving you to die," he said, his voice quieter but firm. "I'm here to help." She glared at him, the icy fire still burning in her gaze, even as her strength waned. "You're insane," she muttered, her voice a rasp. "I'm beyond saving." Liam studied her for a long moment. Every instinct told him to leave. Protocol was clear, no close contact with the enemy, especially one so dangerous. The Cyrene were lethal, and with her legs gone she was only a hindrance. but something in him refused to walk away. "Maybe," he said, finally moving closer, dropping his rifle and reaching for his medical pack. "But I've always been a little crazy." As he worked, stabilizing her injuries with field-grade medical supplies, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this choice, was going to change everything. Whether it was his stubbornness or his compassion, he didn't know, but he knew one thing for certain. Leaving her there, to die alone, was not something he could do. And as he carried her through the crimson dusk, her form slung gently across his chest, his thoughts began to shift. The war, the violence, the endless conflict, it was all there, in the background. But for now, all that mattered was this: keeping her alive. The ruins of a research station appeared ahead, half buried in the sand, the perfect place to lay low. But as he stepped inside, he didn't know what the future would hold. All he knew was that this decision, saving the life of an enemy soldier, was going to lead them both into something neither could have predicted. He had made his choice, and now he would have to live with it. The world beyond the ruins was silent now, save for the hum of Liam's suit and the faint echoes of the distant battle. The Cyrene warrior, whom he had carried through the wasteland, had lost consciousness from the pain and blood loss. Liam gently set her down in a small, somewhat sheltered area of the research station. The place looked as if it had been abandoned for centuries, the equipment covered in dust, the walls cracked from the harsh desert winds, but it would provide shelter for now. He moved quickly, setting up a temporary camp with emergency blankets, activating the makeshift heating units. The station, though old and compromised, still had functioning power, enough to provide some comfort in the harsh, unforgiving environment of Pyros 5. As he worked, he glanced over at the Cyrene warrior. She lay motionless, the stark white of her hair a contrast against the red of her injuries. It was hard to ignore the reality of what she was, the enemy. He had been trained to see her as nothing more than a target, a threat. But as he looked at her now, something about her defiance, even in her weakened state, sparked a sense of empathy in him. Liam shook his head, trying to dispel the thoughts. It was madness. But there was no going back now. He checked his suit's display. The krill were still active in the area, but the signal for backup was lost. He was completely isolated. He couldn't afford to be sentimental now, couldn't afford to make mistakes. But as he looked at the woman before him, struggling for breath, a flicker of doubt lingered. Could he just leave her to die? The instinct that had gotten him through countless battles urged him to let her go. But there was something in his gut that made him hesitate. The woman stirred, her eyes fluttering open. The cold, pale blue of her irises locked onto him, filled with both distrust and confusion. "What are you doing?" she rasped, her voice hoarse. Liam paused, still kneeling beside her, his hand resting on a medkit. He gave her a quick, almost amused look. "I'm saving you," he said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. She blinked at him, clearly not understanding. "You are saving me?" The words sounded foreign in her mouth, laced with disbelief. Her gaze flickered to the stumps where her legs had once been, the trauma she had suffered still evident in the way her chest rose and fell with strained breaths. "You're alive. That's what matters," Liam said, unzipping his pack to reveal a small field med kit. "I'm going to patch you up. At least enough to keep you from dying out here." She scoffed, wincing as she attempted to sit up. "You don't understand. My people." She stopped herself, her jaw tightening, but the pain from her injuries was evident. Her face was pale, drawn, and her breath came in short, shallow gasps. Liam glanced at her, his expression softening for a moment. He had never really thought about what it meant to be the enemy, to be a warrior who had fallen, rendered helpless by something as basic as the loss of limbs. But now, looking at her, he couldn't help but think about the humanity buried within. "Your people didn't do this to you," he said quietly, keeping his voice steady as he reached for the medical supplies. "I did." She met his gaze for a long moment, her icy blue eyes studying him, as if trying to make sense of this strange human who had chosen to help her. She had been trained to hate him, to see humans as nothing more than savage conquerors. But this human, this soldier, had not killed her. He had not left her to die, as many would have. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Why not?" Liam replied simply, focusing on preparing the bandages and medical injectors. "You're a soldier, right? I've got nothing but respect for that. But I don't believe in leaving people to die, even if they're the enemy." For a brief moment, the Cyrene warrior seemed to relax, just slightly. She hadn't expected such a response, certainly not from a human. She was used to brutality, to being treated as a tool of war, to being discarded when no longer useful. "Maybe that's why you're still alive," she muttered under her breath. But there was something in the way her words trembled, as though the weight of them meant more than just the moment. Maybe she hadn't expected to hear that from him. Maybe she hadn't expected to hear kindness. Liam didn't respond. He worked in silence, making quick work of cleaning and dressing her wounds. When he was finished, he leaned back and examined his handiwork, satisfied that she would survive, at least for now. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice low but warm. "Arya Valen," she replied, her voice steady despite the pain. "Of the Third Blade cohort, but I'm sure your intelligence already knows that." Liam chuckled softly, shaking his head. "We know all kinds of things about you. Doesn't mean I'm going to leave you here." Arya's lips parted as though she was about to argue, but she stopped herself. Instead, she looked down at her broken legs, her expression darkening with the weight of her own thoughts. "I'm of no use to you now. You should leave me. Let me die." Liam stood, taking a moment to stretch his back. The night was closing in, and the temperature was beginning to drop. He turned to face her, his gaze hardening with the decision that had already been made. "I told you," he said, his voice firm. "I don't leave people behind, not you, not anyone." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You've got a second chance. Take it. I don't know what's going to happen next, but if you're still breathing, there's something left to fight for." Arya studied him in silence. The warrior in her, trained to fight, to kill, was still there, beneath the layers of exhaustion and pain. She was broken, but she wasn't done. "Perhaps I'm a fool for trusting you," she said at last, her tone softening, if only a little. "But you're not what I expected." "And what did you expect?" Liam asked, intrigued. "Death," she replied bluntly. "Mercy is a strange thing, especially from an enemy." Liam's gaze softened as he met her eyes. "Mercy is human," he said simply. Arya said nothing more, but as Liam turned to check their surroundings, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this choice to help her, to stand by her, was going to change everything. The path they were about to walk together was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they were no longer enemies. They were two broken souls, both with a chance at something new. The hours after their brief respite passed quietly, but Selena couldn't shake the feeling that she was in the middle of something that would change her entire life. She had seen the horrors of war, the death, the destruction. It had hardened her heart, made her trust no one, not even her own people at times. But here, with Liam, in the quiet confines of an abandoned research station, everything felt different. For once, she was not fighting to survive. She wasn't hiding from the next attack or the next round of fire. She was alive, and she owed that life to him, to the human who had saved her, despite the odds, despite the fact that she was his enemy. It felt like a strange kind of irony. She had spent so long fighting against the human race, convinced that they were little more than a nuisance. But now, here she was, lying in a human-made bed, tended to by a human soldier. Liam's voice interrupted her thoughts as he approached with a small pack of food and a canteen of water. "You should eat something," he said, offering it to her with a concerned look. Selene hesitated, staring at the food. The texture was unlike anything she had ever tasted, but it didn't matter. She wasn't here to judge the food. She was here to survive, to learn, to understand. She took the food from his hands and ate slowly, still processing everything that had happened. Liam sat beside her, his expression softening as she finished the meal. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice genuine. "I've been better," she replied with a wry smile. "But this isn't so bad." Liam chuckled, and for the first time since she had met him, Selene allowed herself to truly relax. There was no tension in his smile, no expectation. He was just a soldier, one who had taken it upon himself to help her when no one else would. After a few moments of quiet, Liam spoke again. "You know, you don't have to be alone in this. You don't have to do everything by yourself." Selene looked at him, confusion flickering in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, his voice steady, "I know you've been through a lot, but you don't have to keep carrying all that weight alone. I'm here, the crew's here. You don't have to fight this war by yourself anymore. You've got a place here." Selene's throat tightened. She had never been offered something like this before. The notion that someone she had once seen as an enemy, would be willing to stand by her in her weakest moment felt surreal. I don't know how to trust that," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent my life fighting, living in the shadows of war. I don't know anything else." Liam leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "Trust isn't easy. Hell, it's something I've struggled with my whole life. But I'm asking you to trust me, Selene. Trust that I'm not here to use you. I'm here to help you find something better." Selene felt something stir inside her. It was a foreign feeling, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. "And what if I fail?" she asked, her voice almost shaking. "What if I can't be what you want me to be?" Liam smiled softly. "Then you fail, and we'll pick you up. There's no shame in that. We all fall sometimes. It's how we rise that matters." Selene stared at him for a long moment, feeling the weight of his words sink in. She had always believed that her value was tied to her strength, her ability to fight. But now, in this moment, with him beside her, she realized that perhaps her value didn't lie in just surviving. Maybe it was about more than that. "I never wanted to be a weapon," she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the vast silence of the ruined station. "But that's what I've become." Liam's expression softened, and he placed a hand gently on hers. "You don't have to be that anymore. You don't have to be just a soldier. You can be whatever you want to be." For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was a rare kind of quiet, the kind that comes when two people, once enemies, begin to understand each other on a deeper level. Selene finally exhaled, her body relaxing for the first time in what felt like forever. "I don't know where this road will take me, Liam, but maybe it's time to find out." Liam squeezed her hand reassuringly, we'll find the way together." And in that moment, Selena realized something she hadn't thought possible. She wasn't alone anymore. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outcast, an enemy. She felt like she had a place in this galaxy, a place she had the power to shape. The days blurred into one another as Selene continued to recover, the quiet hum of the UTS Athena becoming a backdrop to her slowly healing body and mind. She had begun to engage more with the crew, though the unfamiliar warmth of the humans was something she still struggled to fully trust. Liam was by her side more often than not, teaching her about his people, their culture, and the strange compassion they seemed to share for those who weren't their own. But even as she grew closer to the crew, a part of her still felt like an outsider. She sat in the quiet of her quarters, staring out the small window that looked out onto the stars. The ship was always in motion, the steady hum of its engines a constant reminder that they were on the move. But Selene couldn't shake the feeling that she was stuck. Her thoughts were like a tangled mess, unwilling to untwist. She had made the decision to stay with the humans, to move away from the war that had consumed her for so long, but there were still pieces of her past that held her back. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had never met?" Liam's voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned to see him standing in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame. He had that same comforting presence about him, the warmth that made her feel like, for the first time in years, she wasn't alone. She shook her head, her mind still clouded. "I think about it every day," she said softly. "I don't know what to do with myself now. I was a soldier, Liam. I was born to fight. But now, what am I? What do I do?" Liam stepped inside and sat beside her, his voice gentle but unwavering. "You do what you need to do, Selene, but you don't have to do it alone." "I don't know if I can ever be the person you think I am," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I was trained to be a weapon, Liam. That's all I've known. I don't know how to be anything else." Liam took her hand, his grip steady and sure. "You don't have to be anything other than who you are. You don't have to fit into some mold or be the perfect soldier. You're allowed to be you, and you're more than just the past that's followed you here." His words, simple as they were, cut through the fog in her mind. She had spent so long seeing herself as just a weapon, something to be used, something to be thrown away once it was no longer useful. But maybe she could be something more. Maybe she could redefine who she was, even if it scared her. "I've never really had a choice before," she said quietly. "My choices were made for me. But now I'm here, and I'm not sure what to do with this chance." Liam's eyes softened, and he gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Then let's figure it out together, one step at a time." Selene turned to him, her heart fluttering slightly. "I don't deserve this chance. Not after everything I've done." Liam shook his head, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You're wrong. You deserve it, Selene. You've earned it just by being here." Her eyes searched his face, trying to understand him, trying to understand the sincerity in his voice. It was hard for her to accept. She had been taught that emotions were a weakness, that showing any sign of vulnerability meant death. But Liam, he didn't seem to care about any of that. He was just kind, and that made it harder for her to push him away. For the first time, Selene felt something shift in her chest, like a tiny crack in the wall she had spent so many years building around her heart. She didn't know if she was ready to let go of her past, to completely embrace this new life. But for the first time, she didn't feel completely lost, and that, in itself, was progress. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. Liam smiled, his blue eyes sparkling with understanding. "There's nothing to thank me for. You've got a second chance, Celine. You don't need to carry that weight alone anymore." They sat in silence for a long moment, the soft hum of the ship lulling them into a rare peace. Celine didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. For the first time, she didn't have to face it alone. The days that followed felt like a quiet sea, the calm after the storm of battle. The USS Athena sailed smoothly through the void, leaving behind the wreckage of war. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Celine could almost breathe again. The familiar weight of the gun in her hand, the relentless pressure of her duty, had been replaced by something else. Something uncertain, but strangely comforting. The crew of the Athena had accepted her, not as an alien warrior or a soldier of the enemy, but as someone who was simply there. She was learning, slowly, to fit in with their strange ways, to understand the balance between survival and compassion that they held so dear. But that didn't mean her past was gone. It still haunted her. Whispers of her people's brutal ways, the coldness of their commands, the bloodshed. Liam, as patient as he was, couldn't fix that. No one could. But as she walked through the ship's corridors, something else began to shift. The stares, the uncomfortable silences had started to fade. She wasn't just the alien anymore. She wasn't just the one who had survived. She was becoming Celine, just a person like everyone else aboard. One morning, after another training session with Liam, he pulled her aside as they exited the sparring room, a light sweat clinging to both their brows. "You're improving," he said with a smile, though his tone was serious. "But I think you're still holding something back. You're stronger than this. You've been through worse." Celine paused, her breath steadying as she wiped her face with a towel. "I don't know if I can do this, Liam," she confessed, her voice low, almost lost in the hum of the ship. "I'm still not sure where I fit in here. I was raised to fight, to kill. But now, I don't know what I'm supposed to be, what I'm supposed to do." Liam turned to her, his expression soft but firm, a look she had come to trust. "You've already taken the hardest step, Celine. You've stayed. You're still here, and you're learning to trust. That's more than most people would do. But trust doesn't mean you have to forget everything you've been through." Her mind raced as she considered his words. Could she really leave behind everything she had known? Could she stop being the soldier she was trained to be and become something more? Someone who didn't just survive, but lived? "I don't know if I can leave it all behind," she admitted, almost pleading, her eyes not meeting his. "I don't know how to stop being a weapon." Liam reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, his grip gentle but steady. "You don't have to stop being who you are, Celine, but you can choose who you want to be now. And you don't have to fight alone anymore." Her chest tightened. For the first time, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. Hope. But it felt foreign, like a language she couldn't quite speak. She inhaled deeply and looked up at him. "And what if I can't?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Liam gave a small, reassuring smile. "Then I'll be here, helping you figure it out, one step at a time." Her heart skipped a beat as she took in his words, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel completely lost. She wasn't sure how or when it had happened, but Liam had slowly become someone she trusted. And in this unfamiliar space, among people who had once been her enemies, Celine realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to live. Later that day, the Athena was preparing to make its jump to a new mission, an unknown world that had been hit by Krill raiders, its people struggling to survive in the aftermath. Celine had been asked to join the mission, a chance to prove her worth beyond the battlefield, beyond the bloodshed. As she stood at the ship's observation window, Looking out at the infinite stars stretching before her, Liam appeared beside her, the familiar presence of his warmth at her back. "Ready for your first mission with us?" he asked, his voice light but laced with something more. She turned to him, meeting his gaze. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, "but I'm going to try." Liam smiled, nodding. "That's all I'm asking. We're in this together." The words hung in the air between them, and Celine finally allowed herself to believe them. She was no longer just a soldier. She wasn't defined by the blood on her hands or the orders she had once followed without question. For the first time, she felt like she had a choice. And that choice was to stand with them, to fight for something greater than herself. The UTS Athena moved steadily through space, its engines a steady hum beneath the surface of the crew's bustling activities. Celine had adjusted to life on board, and the routine was starting to feel natural. As strange as it was, she found herself beginning to appreciate the normalcy of it all, being part of something that wasn't dictated by war. For once, it wasn't about surviving the next attack or planning for the next battle. It was about rebuilding, and for the first time, Celine felt like she was part of something bigger. That morning, after a long shift in the cargo hold, she was summoned to the bridge. Her heart raced as she made her way to the command center, her boots heavy with uncertainty. What was this about? Had something gone wrong? Was it time for another mission? She entered the bridge to find Liam waiting for her, standing beside Captain Reynolds. Both of them looked serious, but there was something in their eyes, something that made Celine feel both curious and apprehensive. "Come in, Celine," Liam said, his voice as calm as ever. "We've got something to discuss." Celine glanced at them, her stomach tightening. "What's going on?" Liam exchanged a glance with Captain Reynolds, who stepped forward. "We've received word of a new mission," he began. "There's a colony on Zeta 9 that's been hit by the krill. We believe it's a priority rescue operation." Celine's heart skipped a beat. The krill were a dangerous enemy. The possibility of encountering them again made her pulse quicken. But there was something else in Reynolds' words, a weight she hadn't expected. "We need you for this mission, Celine," Captain Reynolds continued, his tone firm but not unkind. "You've been a valuable asset to the crew, and we think your skills, your experience, could make the difference in the success of this operation." Celine's throat went dry. "You want me to go to Zeta 9 with you? After everything I've been through?" Liam stepped forward, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You've already proven yourself, Celine. We believe you're ready for this. You're no longer just a soldier. You're part of this crew. And that means we need you on this mission." Celine's mind spun. This wasn't what she had expected. She had thought that her days of fighting, of being thrust into dangerous missions, were behind her. She had chosen to stay with the Athena, but she had never anticipated being asked to take on another mission, especially not so soon. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure I'm ready to dive back into this. The krill are ruthless, Liam, and I still haven't even figured out what I'm supposed to be here." Liam's expression softened, and he gently turned her to face him. "You're not alone in this. I won't let you face this alone. You've been through so much, but you're stronger than you know. And I'm asking you to take this step, not just for the crew, but for yourself. You're more than just a soldier, Celine. You're a person who can make a difference, and that difference right now is needed." Celine stared at him, her chest tightening with the weight of his words. She had fought, survived, and lived in a world where there was nothing but destruction and chaos. But here, with these humans, there was something else. There was hope. hope she had forgotten how to feel. And in Liam's words, in his unwavering support, she felt the tiniest spark of it return. "I don't know if I'm ready," she repeated, but there was a change in her voice now. It was softer, more open. "But I'll do it. I'll go with you, for the crew, for the survivors." Liam's eyes lit up, and he gave her a small, encouraging smile. "That's all I needed to hear. We'll get you ready for this, Celine. You're not just a soldier. You're part of something more now, and I believe in you." As they made their way to the briefing room, Celine felt the weight of the decision settle within her. This wasn't just a mission. It was a chance for her to take control of her future, to build something new. The thought both terrified and excited her. She didn't know if she was truly ready, but she was going to try. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had something worth fighting for. The mission would be dangerous, of course. There would be risks, challenges, and obstacles, but she wasn't going into it alone. And that, for the first time, made all the difference. The UTS Athena cut through the stars, its sleek silhouette gliding past the distant planets and asteroid fields. The vastness of space was both beautiful and terrifying, but for the first time, Selena felt like she belonged here, among these people, on this ship. She had made her decision. She was no longer just a soldier, no longer a casualty of war. She was part of something bigger. And the upcoming mission, an attempt to rescue the survivors on Zeta 9, would be her first test of whether she could truly let go of her past and embrace her future. The mission was straightforward, a rescue operation on a small colony in the Zeta 9 system that had been ravaged by a Krill attack. The survivors had gone into hiding, and the human forces were going to extract them and provide medical assistance. But Celine knew that nothing was ever truly straightforward when it came to the Krill. Their attacks were swift and brutal, leaving destruction in their wake. Liam had been with her every step of the way, preparing her for what was to come. They spent hours in the training rooms, going over tactics, simulating scenarios, and even sparring. Liam was relentless in pushing her, but he was patient too. He never forced her to do something she wasn't ready for, and every time she faltered, he was there to catch her. "We're not just here to fight," he told her during one of their sparring sessions. "We're here to save lives. You're not just a soldier anymore, Celine. You're a protector, and there's nothing more powerful than that." His words stuck with her as the shuttle descended toward Zeta 9. The planet below was a mix of deserts and craggy mountains, its surface scarred by the Krill's assault. From orbit, it looked peaceful, almost serene. But Selena knew better. Peace was just an illusion. The shuttle broke through the atmosphere, its engines roaring as it pierced the thick clouds. Liam sat next to her, his gaze focused on the mission at hand. His presence was grounding, a reminder that they were in this together. They were a team, and that was all that mattered. As they neared the colony's coordinates, the comms crackled to life. "Athena, this is Ground Command. We've detected Krill activity on the outskirts of the colony. The survivors are holed up in the old research facility, but they won't last much longer. You'll need to move fast." Celine's heart raced as she adjusted her grip on her rifle. This was it, the moment she had prepared for. The stakes were higher now, and there was no turning back. "Understood, Ground Command," Liam responded, his voice calm and composed. "We're on our way." The shuttle touched down on the cracked earth near the research facility. The structure, once a beacon of scientific discovery, was now little more than a hollow shell. Smoke curled from broken windows, and debris littered the ground. Selena could feel the tension in the air, the weight of what they were about to do. But as she stepped off the shuttle, her pulse steady and her mind clear, she knew that this was the moment she had been waiting for. They moved quickly, covering the area around the research facility. The sounds of battle still echoed in the distance, but Celine focused on the task at hand. Her training, her instincts kicked in. Every step, every decision was made with purpose. Inside the facility, the survivors were hiding, their faces drawn with fear and exhaustion. Celine felt a pang of sympathy, but she didn't allow it to cloud her judgment. They were depending on her. They were depending on all of them. "We're here to help," Liam said as he approached the group, his voice reassuring. "Stay close and we'll get you out of here." But just as they were about to move the survivors to safety, a shrill, unmistakable screech echoed from above. The krill had returned. Celine's heart skipped a beat as she turned to face the sound. The alien creatures swarmed down from the skies, their razor-sharp claws gleaming in the light. There was no time to hesitate. The battle was on. The survivors scrambled, ducking behind cover, but Liam and Celine stood firm. With practiced precision, they opened fire, each shot striking its target, the krill falling to the ground with sickening thuds. But the swarm was endless. For every krill they took down, another seemed to take its place. "Get them out of here!" Liam shouted, his voice booming over the chaos. "We'll hold them off." Celine didn't hesitate. She grabbed the survivors and ushered them toward the escape route, her rifle raised, her every step calculated. Liam was right behind her, covering their retreat. But it wasn't enough. The krill were closing in. Just when Celine thought the situation might spiral out of control, she spotted a group of human soldiers running toward them, reinforcements from the Athena. They dove into the fray, taking down krill with coordinated fire. It was a chaotic, brutal dance, but it was one they were winning. As the last of the krill fell, and the survivors were safely evacuated, Liam and Celine stood amidst the aftermath, panting and covered in grime, their hearts still pounding from the fight. "You did good, Celine," Liam said, his voice steady, but there was a glint of admiration in his eyes. Celine looked around at the survivors, at the devastation, and for the first time, she didn't feel like a soldier doing her duty. She felt something more. She felt human. She felt connected to these people. "We did good," she corrected, a small smile tugging at her lips. The mission wasn't over, but Celine knew this was a turning point. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore, she was fighting for something worth believing in. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she was finally on the right side of history. The sun was setting on Zeta 9, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. The faint glow of the survivors' campfire flickered in the distance, its warmth a beacon of hope in an otherwise desolate world. The battle had been hard, and the cost had been high, but they had made it through. The survivors had been rescued, and the krill forces were now scattered, at least for the moment. Celine stood at the edge of the camp, her hand resting on the cool metal of her rifle. The weight of it felt different now, less like a tool of war, and more like a symbol of the protection she had promised to the people she had just saved. She watched the survivors huddle around the fire, talking, laughing, slowly rebuilding what they had lost. There was a sense of quiet pride in the air, an unspoken understanding that, despite everything they had been through, they had survived together. Liam approached from behind, his footsteps light but steady. He said nothing at first, just standing beside her, gazing out at the camp. The soft crackle of the fire and the hum of the ship in the distance filled the space between them. "Not what you expected, huh?" Liam said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of the moment. Celine turned her head to meet his gaze, her expression soft but thoughtful. "No," she admitted, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "It's more than I expected." She had expected to be a soldier forever, caught in an endless cycle of violence. She had expected to return to the war. But now, as she stood there, looking at the survivors who were starting to rebuild their lives, she realized something. She had been given a second chance, not just to survive, but to live. "I thought I was just a weapon," she continued, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "But today I was something more." Liam nodded, his hand brushing against hers in a casual gesture of reassurance. "You always were more than that, Celine. You just needed to see it." The silence stretched between them for a moment, not uncomfortable, but filled with the weight of their shared experiences. Celine glanced at him again, her mind turning over everything that had happened since they had met. Everything that had changed. "You know," she said, "I don't know what comes next. I don't know if I'm ready to leave everything behind, my people, my past." Liam squeezed her hand gently. "You don't have to leave it all behind, but you can choose what comes next. You don't have to be the soldier you were. You can be something more." Celine took a deep breath, absorbing his words. The weight of her past was still heavy on her shoulders, but the future seemed less daunting now. For the first time in years, she felt like she had a choice. She wasn't bound by the expectations of her people, nor was she defined by the war she had fought in. She was free. "I think," Celine started, her voice growing more confident with each word, "I think I want to fight for something different. Something better, not just for survival but for the future." Liam smiled, his eyes warm. "That's the first step. You're not alone in this, Celine. We're all in this together." And as the last light of the day faded into the horizon, Selina felt something stir deep inside her. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The future was uncertain, but it was hers to shape. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. What would you choose if you could leave your past behind and start over? Share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes the hardest part is realizing you have the power to change.